Yeah, I love this one. This is in this old head a proper single. Hello, with a B-side, a free track that isn't on an album, but excellent. This is the song that coalesced what was happening in my head about now, about this scary world we're in, and we've moved past the point where myself or the Boomtown Rats can influence that in any way, or indeed the form that we use to influence the world can't do that anymore, rock and roll. But the noise nonetheless encapsulates and articulates and expresses, at least for us, the confusion and the rage and the necessary anger to drive change. And that's a big thing for me. We must always be, change is always happening, and the trick is to try and grab it and steer it in the direction you want it to be. So I was in the King's Road in London is a famous road. That's where the 60s and 70s all happened, whether it was the Beatles or the Stones or the Sex Pistols. It happened on that street. And at the end of the King's Road, there's a little squiggle, an S-bend, and it continues, but it's called the World's End. Vivienne Westwood and Malcolm McLaren set up a little shop there called Sex, which is still there, and the Sex Pistols started in that shop. Just down the road, the Clash started in another shop called Boy. That shop is still there, it's called Ad Hoc. In the 80s, Brian Ferry from Roxy Music and Duran Duran bought their clothes in a shop called Anthony Price. It's gone. Oscar Wilde lived just down the road, and he made a theatre of the self like these guys. And just on the S-bend itself, Mick and Keith and Brian began the Rolling Stones in this filthy flat that they had then. I was in there. There's 3 charity shops I go to buy some cool, cheap shirts. This is one. I think you'll agree it's cool, and it also looks cheap. I was in there on a Saturday, and this kid comes in, and she's 15 or 16, and she's got it down. And if I was 15 or 16, I'd be looking at this girl and I'd be going, wow, she's cool, can I be like that? She wasn't beautiful, so if I was 15 or 16, I don't think I'd be fancying her. I'd just be so attracted by her balls. She was like this sequin tramp, this living glitter ball. She was beautiful. And she was complaining and whining like only English London 16-year-olds can whinge all the time. And she was talking to her mate who was working in the charity shop, and they were talking about Like Again, Perfectly for 15 or 16, another shit Saturday night. Anyway, they had no money, and the boys were all rubbish. And by the way, what happened to that feather boa that was in last week, and could she swap it, could she trade it for something else? And I was thrown back to when the Rats arrived in London. We came out of a very silent, conservative, Catholic Ireland of the 1970s, where the girls were quiet and polite and, tried their best to be non-sexual. And I was suddenly thrown into the middle of this cultural revolution that was happening in London around bands like the Pistols, and the Ramones were making a go there, and the Rats were. But the girls were just as ballsy, just as exciting, just as opinionated, just as loud, just as funny, just as mad and wild and rebel as the guys. And they exhilarated me, and I wanted to be around them. And one of them ended up being our publicist, and one of them ended up being my wife. And I was on the tube in London one day, and there were some kids coming in from the suburbs, and they had their Doc Martens on and their ripped fishnets and, ridiculous mini skirts with shorts or something on underneath. Great. And people were outraged by them. Great. And they were just saying, fuck you, we're coming. And nothing was going to stop them. And I wrote She's So 20th Century, She's So 1970s, and it was our first top 10 record. I saw the trash Glam Baby in that charity shop. She was so 21st century. And I hope to God that these kids are coming, because we need it again.
Thanks for watching Behind the Vinyl. We have got a ton more episodes available to you. Your favorite artists with your favorite stories. And here's the thing, we're updating Behind the Vinyl all the time. So if you want to stay up to date on that, simply subscribe by clicking right up here. And you could do us a huge favor by sharing some Behind the Vinyls on your socials. Thanks.